I know today has been, a most rewarding day. I think it's more about how development, automation, and simplifying operations to the operators, beyond what we always do, config provisioning and management. But what I want to touch base is when we adopt into newer technologies like segment routing or SRv6, there's always that jitters. Hey, how do I move? How do I migrate? What happens to my current network? So I'm Sujay Murthy. I'm a technical marketing engineer in the Cisco's IMI automation business unit. So let me work and walk you through some of the use cases, right? I'm not an expert on the key innovations like why segment routing or why other technologies, but as we adopt into automation and solutions, what are the key enablers with SR SRv6? Why certain use cases with SR SRv6 makes it important that automation can drive the adoption with simplicity? And as we have seen with SR innovations, it's always a service creation at a hyperscale. You have your similar requirements, network visualization, real-time low latency or path, disjoint path capabilities, what SR offers. Some of you who are into multicast journey, tree set capabilities, intent-based steering like flex algos, SRv6 locators, and then you're slicing for use cases. Can I have a slice with a specific intent? And how can I have the overall end-to-end service awareness and infrastructure visibility? So a lot of these key enablers help us drive with automation. That adds the simplicity to as an operator on how to achieve these use cases. How can I build more of the SRv6 capabilities into layer 2, layer 3 VPN services and do service assurance? But here is a main challenge. I mean, the benefits of segment routing. You know how SRv6 is a great technology to adopt and scale. But what you always run into is how do I migrate to this network? What happens to my current services? Do I need to do this manually? I mean, what are the intervention needed? What are the human errors? And what is the pre-checks needed? What do I need to check before I make a certain change or a config change? And then overall, can the controller help me reap the benefits of SRMPLS or SRv6 use cases? So in reality, what we want to call out and say, it is automatable. I mean, we are not saying every migration has to be, not easy or not simple, but we would try to make it simpler with automation to help you build those building blocks, help and achieve what it takes to migrate your services into SRv6. So let's look at what does a service migration look like. When I have services and I want to migrate from an LDP or an MPLS network into segment routing SRv6, what does it take? So for a brownfield migration, it's typically a 4-phase deployment. That is, I start from my initial state, which is the MPLS underlay. I currently have services. Now I want to enable IPv6 routing, and I want to introduce a new route reflector for SRv6. And then in the phase 2, I go into providing a set of SRv6 configs or advertised VPNs on a set of PE routers that are capable and do both MPLS labels as well as SRv6 labels, right? So I need to use a BGP policy to prefer an SRv6 advertisement and probably do a granularity with, per prefix under the provider edge router. Can I move all my PEs into SRv6? All PEs advertise the VPN and the BGP policy will prefer the SRv6 advertisement. And finally, once I make sure that the phase 3 is good for me, can I remove the old configs? Can I remove the MPLS and now use IPv6 SRv6 to do my BGP services? So as part of today's demo, what I'm going to focus is on the phase 1 to phase 3 approach. That is, what does it take with automation and what are the configs that a snippet looks like? So in the intent of what we've seen, what Crosswork Automation portfolio does, I think it has been an ongoing journey. I mean, you've started with your config management. Now let's also enable to a newer technology and adoption of use cases. Day -1 to day and ops. I mean, that's the whole intent for the Crosswork Automation portfolio is where could I start planning, use my greenfield or brownfield integration, migration, making some actions, and then looking into visibility. So we have at these various stages the various components that help and achieve. And for this demonstration today that I'm going to showcase with migration to SRv6, I'm going to use the Crosswork Workflow Manager that uses the best of the integration workflow capabilities with CWM, integrating with CNC and NSO APIs. And within NSO, I have the pre-configured templates using the golden configuration or the rack templates to create those simple Jinja template configs and provision the services and then manage them through workflows to say when to instantiate and intent. Now, an integration with the workflow is the migration flow. Like, where can I start with first? What does it take? I need to have on the NSO those template applications and those plan files that is available as part of the golden config and NSO package. And I have an NSO adapter in the workflow manager that talks to the NSO, and also with CNC APIs, I can talk to the service and make those service updates when I need to switch from an MPLS to an IPv6 world. And on the right-hand side, I have this set of workflows that are created, and I'll show that in a moment as where and how these are developed. But in the interim, I can also have a WebEx notification or a chatbot integrated to notify me as to tell me the updates of what is the state of the migration, what has completed, what is waiting, and what are my next notifications that is going to be received. So migration to SRv6 typically flows under you always go into your design, plan, prepare, and operate and optimize. You design your SRv6 network or topology. When you've introduced a new SRv6 route reflector, and then you enable those key capabilities of IPv6 routing, SRv6 on prefixes or per PEs or all the PEs, and then remove MPLS from the network. And then post migration, you want to use them on your services. Like if you have your existing layer 2 or layer 3 VPN services, how can I use those SRv6 locators to bind to those VPN service models? So I'm going to show and walk you through this demo. It's more pre-created and one of a live use case. But when I run through this demo, I want to walk you through what are the steps that's needed. What are the configs looks like? So for example, when I start with the topology, this is my topology scenario that I'm going to create. And I'm going to particularly refer to these three nodes, node 2, 3, and 4, which have a service. And these service nodes are created on the network to provision a VPN service. And then I'm going to migrate all the network into SRv6 and key capabilities. So what are the steps for migration? Enable IPv6 addressing and routing. Step 2 is to enable SRv6 locators. I'm creating these as workflows. I've identified what are the steps needed. The step 3 is to add the route reflector v6 and the BGP v6 sessions. And then on step 4a, which is to enable a dual connected PE feature on a VRS, which still prefers MPLS as the underlay. And then finally, apply a BGP policy that prefers SRv6 advertisements, which will prefer the SRv6 underlay. So on the topology, I currently have the ISIS v4, IPv4 configs. I look at the link. I have the data, the summary of the link, which says it's an L3 ISIS IPv4. On the link, I can say that what is the metric or utilization, and it's currently using the T router ID, which is IPv4 address. Now I can start with the migration is to enable ISIS v4 plus LTP, which is on all the nodes, and they are already talking to the route reflector v4. I have a VPN 101, which is already created. And then I move into service provisioning, where I have a layer 3 VPN service. So this is my, before the SR stage, I'm validating to see what use cases I have, what are the services, and the ping at the bottom is to make sure that the migration, when it happens, it is seamless and there are no drops in packets when it migrates. But I can also validate with the configs as to what checks I need to make sure that the configs are aligned. Topology configuration, I pick on an interface, look at what are the neighboring connectivity types, pick all those interface types, and add IPv6 enable commands, no shutdown, enable IPv6 addressing. So manually, if you were to do, these are the list of steps, like what you do with IPv6 config. You enable ISIS v6 on all the nodes to say under the router instance, enable all the ISIS configs to the interfaces to the gigabit Ethernet that are neighbors to the respective nodes. LDP to SRv6 migration, enable those locators. I'm creating a set of locators with a set of flex algos to say what are the prefixes. And then on the router ISIS, what is the address family IPv6 and what is the segment routing locators that are advertised. Now I move add the route reflector v6. So as I said, that you have a different route reflector v6 that you've enabled, provisioned it, and configured it on the network. So what's the configuration looks like? So you want to have a BGP policy that still prefers MPLS advertisements, but you want to advertise or have a local route reflector v6 with a lower local preference, so that when these routes are advertised, it's not still the best path. So we are building those blocks, building those configs, and that's what it takes. And finally, I enable dual connected PE feature to say on the VRF VPN, allocate a segment routing SRv6, and this is the locator that I want to use. I still validate, BGP with IPv4 next hop, which is the best path in this case to say, which is 50. And it is still, the ping is continuous. There's no disruption in the network, but this is the config change that it needs to happen. So finally, I would set this to a local preference in the route policy definition to say what is the local preference 150, and I end this policy in this use case. So let me switch my screen. I mean, what I wanted to cover here through the slides, what does it take to migrate? What are the various configs? And how can I build this through various workflows? So this is a snapshot of my current topology that is showing the CNC instance view that already has a topology instance and the links. But I'll walk you through the workflow manager. In this case, so in the workflow manager, I've created a preset of workflows that tells me to enable those steps from 1 to 5, or the 4A and the different workflows options. So in the workflows, these are the 1 to 4C are the various workflows that are created. Now this is kind of run in independent steps, is to make sure that what steps that you want to start with first. So I'll start with, for an example, on the enable IPv6. Now in the slide deck that I presented, where I showed for what is the IPv6 configs that I need to enable, the workflow will show me on the sequence that for every device in the network, I need to create the workflow for IPv6, and it will create this intent for all the devices in the node. And then this is run as workflow jobs. So I'm running those different workflows, in this case, to enable IPv6, enable SRv6, that is create those set of locators to say, okay, what is the payload and what is the workflow template that I'm enabled as part of this use case. Finally, looking into creating those route reflector v6 peers. You add your route reflectors. What is the config that is needed for the route reflector v6 peers? You set the preference to 50. So I have a different workflow jobs to run this, to say create a workflow with a policy 50, and then migrate my L3 VPN service. In this case, pick an L3 VPN service that is already existing in the network. So using the CNC's API, I would say use the ITF L3 VPN network service model, attach this locator, and once it's attached, apply those ZANG changes through the CNC's API to the service. So let's see them in action. All right. So I've already run a preset of jobs. The idea was to showcase that I have this jobs that are pre-created. So they are running these set of jobs from the workflow manager. Every node is configured with the service. So let me also show the NSO UI in this case, because on the NSO, where I have the instance of the golden config templates. So these are the various golden configuration templates that are used. Now, if you see the workflow manager job that was created, when it said it's to create IPv6, I'm running them across all the nodes. And these are also being notified through the WebEx chatbot. So in this case, I have a WebEx chatbot that notifies me from the intent is what is the state of the device. So it says, when was the IPv6 on device created? Workflow Manager has completed processing, and these are the various workflow notifications that I'm sending to be notified on the WebEx chatbot as to what is the state of the workflow, what is the configuration that is pushed, and what is enabled on the config. So every workflow is combined with a set of jobs, and these jobs will be executed in sequence. So where I am at a current state is I've enabled up to 4B, which is if I go back on the slide when I said that I've migrated this to L3 VPN service. Now, which means that my L3 VPN service that's already running here on the VPN services tab here, there is a VPN 101 that's already configured, and the VPN 101 is already provisioned now with the layer 3 VPN construct for SRv6 on the configuration types on the text. And I can see here that it's now configured with SRv6 locator main. And if you ask me, can we validate this on the network? I mean, as a network administrator or an operator, this becomes really imperative is to know, okay, has the service which is on node 2 using VPN 101 and using the locator main. Can I verify this? Yes, I can verify this through the post check operation to validate that the service is already intent and derived. But having said this, right now my network is currently in the is advertising both routes, as I said, from a V6 peer, which is at the local preference of 50, but the preferred path is still MPLS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run to the workflow manager to run the last workflow in this case is to update the route reflector V6 policy to update this intent with a higher local preference so that when the policy is determined, is set, it will set this to a higher preference. And I have those input variables to say for which nodes that I'm picking in this case, which is node 2, 3, and 4. And it will update the route reflector V6 with a policy 150. So if I go ahead, click and run the job, look at the job details to say that the task is created, there are child workflows that are being executed. Um, on the similar intent, it's also, we will see that there is no update here because the route reflector policy is already applied. So no state change, but the workflow will show me once the task is completed and the policy is updated on the router. We can see that now I will go back to the network to verify that is the route reflector policy being updated in this case. Right, so jobs. So it's said it's completed. Let's look at even the option here. And what I expect is to see that the local preference is now updated to 50, and this is taking the preferred path. Right, so workflow manager check with those workflows helps you to seamlessly migrate your use cases and also validate your checks. I mean, this is a demonstration to show that with the different workflows that have been created, this can be synchronized and through notifications to notify the operator as to what are the status of my current workflow and use cases that can be executed as part of the intent. Right, so let me come back to my slides. So we did this operation, and this is what I demonstrated live, is once the service is created, I can now verify that the preferred path is the IPv6 next hop, which is the best path in this case. So having said that, I know this steps, the idea of this demonstration was to showcase with Crosswork automation, it can be simplified. We know that migration is not an easy task when you have a set of routers, set of networks, and topology, but this can be simplified towards different use cases as well. So what we want to overall conclude in this is the SR and SRv6 migration or a journey. I know there are key technological benefits and advancements in the transport domain network, but it's always helpful and simpler to unlock these advantages to the outcomes. How can you deploy these services faster? Because if you want to embrace your newer technology, you need to migrate faster. And to migrate, can automation help you with your migration process? Build those building blocks. Yes, I think that's the key message here. Through the demonstration and the integration with Workflow Manager, CNC, and SRv6, they all build that foundation to build those migration use cases, improve your service delivery. Today, you could move to certain prefixes, certain nodes, certain devices, or certain services, and avoid any mitigation failures. And finally, it's boosting your operational agility. Like as I said, you could take this on a maintenance window, do your migration. If you feel confident, move with your services, or you could keep your dual plane connectivity into the network and continue with your legacy traditional networks, also with your newer networks in the use cases. Finally, call to action. We've been today discussing about different use cases across Crosswork Network Controller, Workflow Manager, NSO integration, CNC, service assurance. So, these are all the building blocks towards your automation journey. It'll help improve your service delivery end to end. Engage us with POCs and demos or any use cases that you would like to validate. We have an upcoming CNC 7.1 release. Please sign up for EFTs to try out these use cases, and we are in this journey to help for this implementation. So I hope this session was useful. Please feel free to share your questions in the chat, and I'm happy to address them.
CJ, thanks. There was a lot of good information there. So just go off that conclusion slide, a couple questions. So if you're looking at doing this and you have a large complex network and you want to start with a proof of concept for the automation, what's a good scope for doing a proof of concept and testing out your plan? Is it a single set of services, a small set of routers, or kind of how do you go about structuring a POC for this?
Sure, yeah, Omar, thanks for that question. So I think the idea is to, you always want to try these use cases on your topology. So if you have a pre-production topology network, you can pick a set of routers like a provider edge routers first, because those are the key routers in the network that enable a lot of services. So you can pick a set of handful of routers and try out these use cases with pre and post checks in the connectivity, and as well as also maintaining that your legacy network still stays intact, and then there are no impacts on the existing network while you're doing your workflows on migration towards newer technology. So
cool. Okay. And if someone does want to sign up for the 7.1 EFT, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, I think good question. I think we can reach out through the account managers or reach out to us. We have an email alias. I believe it's askcnc-plm@cisco.com. We can probably also share that and send out in the chat. But there is you can send out an email, or I think the best way is to reach out to your account managers and let us know. Or you can also post your question on the Developer Hub community, and one of us can respond and get back to you if you're interested.
Okay, sounds good. So a lot of what you showed is dependent on Crosswork Workflow Manager. So is that a separate product? Is it integrated? What's the relationship between the products and the kind of the pieces and parts you showed that make them work together?
Sure. Yeah, so as of the current release, what we have with Workflow Manager 1.2 and CNC 7.0, there are still different components, but in the CNC 7.1 release, the Workflow Manager is integrated into the Crosswork Network Controller. So you will have on the left side pane of CNC to view your workflows and the status of your job. So that is going to be integrated in the upcoming release.
Cool. And so the process that you showed in integrating, workflow and CNC and the like for SRv6 service migration, can you take that same concept and apply it for other scenarios? Is it pretty straightforward?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Omar. So the idea was here to showcase how we could build through workflows, your pre-checks, post-checks, integrated with what are network nodes, the device configs it takes. It's kind of those building blocks. But having said that, it's not limited, like this workflow cannot be used for other use cases. All that you would have to know is what does the config look like? What does it take? And what are my pre-checks and post-checks needed? So this can be used for other use cases. Like, for example, in this case, I showed only the migration for L3 VPN service. I mean, you could do this similarly for a layer 2 VPN service where you have a pseudo wire running, or in your journey of VPLS to EVPN type services. Um, so the migration workflows can be generalized. I mean, these are generic building blocks, but can be expanded to different use cases, provided the user can provide what are the checks and the configs needed to achieve those migration.
Cool. Thank you. Makes a lot of sense. So thank you, CJ. Great session, and thanks for the answers to those questions.